Hello everyone, welcome to another Bitcoin related tutorial. In this video I'm going to be providing some information that will hopefully help more people to make their voice heard in the ongoing spam war. Now if you're not familiar with that, there's been a long-standing debate within the Bitcoin community over whether non-monetary uses of the network should be allowed or if they should be resisted. And that would include things like embedding pictures of, derpy wizards or catatonic monkeys or alcoholic frogs onto the blockchain, or VC-funded pump and dump scams. This is actually a debate that's been around since the early years. Even Satoshi weighed in on the discussion. But it's most recently been rekindled because of the op return debate. I won't go into the op return debate too much in this video. There's been a number of people who've done really good discussions on it, which I'll post some links in the description if you're interested in digging into that further, if you don't already know about it. But essentially, just to summarize what the op return debate is about, there's been a push among some of the developers of Bitcoin Core, which is the main software that people run when they're running a Bitcoin node, to remove a limit on something called op return. An op return is a place in the blockchain that you can store arbitrary data. It's currently limited to a few characters, so you can basically put a fingerprint in there. Rather than putting a whole file, you can create a fingerprint of the file and put that into the op return. That's essentially what it's designed for. But the push among the Bitcoin Core developers is to remove that limit. And so essentially people would be able to put entire files into the op return rather than just fingerprints. The interesting thing about that, though, is this comes after their rejecting of adding filters to existing spam in the witness data. So these filters are currently implemented in Bitcoin knots, for example, but they rejected those because they said it was too controversial, and they're not 100% effective anyway, so they're kind of pointless to add them. That's essentially their position. If I was to create an analogy for this, it would be something like, say you're at home and you hear a knock at the door, you go over and there's somebody at the door, they say, "Hey, I'm from the HOA. I just wanted to let you know we got some new regulations about door locks coming down." Door locks? Yeah, so when a burglar breaks into your house, they do a lot of damage. They might kick in the door, or they might smash a window. And so one of our board members, James, he works down at the pawn shop. He had a brilliant idea where why don't we just ban the locks on doors? That way, whenever a break-in happens, at least you don't have to go through the home repair, to fix the door or the window. Besides, door locks are easy to pick, so they're not really. It's kind of pointless to even have them in the first place. Yeah, but what about that? The proposal I made a couple of years ago about allowing us to build taller fences or add security cameras, maybe increase the security patrols in the neighborhood. Yeah, that proposal was a bit controversial, and it wouldn't have blocked all burglaries anyway. So it's kind of pointless. It really wouldn't have worked. So we're not going to be adding that one. But don't worry, I'm not going to do anything today. I'll just mark your door lockdown as deprecated. And then after this whole thing's blown over and everybody's calmed down, I'll come by in a future visit and I'll remove your lock for you. So that's basically an analogy of what's going on with the spam war. Obviously the HOA in that analogy represents the Bitcoin Core team. The removal of the door lock represents, the removal of the op return limit. The proposal about taller fences and security cameras and more security patrols. Those would be the filters against current spam that Bitcoin Knots has. And Shinobi, the house in this analogy does not represent a single node. It represents the entire network of nodes. So it is actually a good analogy. Now, those of you that have known me for more than a couple of years, you'll know that I'm fairly new to the anti-spam side of the argument. And a couple of you are probably on the edge of your seat ready to flame me in the comments. So let me address that before I get started. I was originally on the wrong side of the spam war, as I was on the wrong side of the block size war. I actually mined Bcash after it forked from Bitcoin, because I bought into the narrative back then that the miners controlled consensus, and the majority of miners were for the large block size, and so I assumed that they would essentially win out. So of course I was surprised when Bcash essentially crashed to zero, and miners had to bend the knee to the small blockers. So that sort of made me rethink my understanding of how the network works, and I realized that while it is true that the node operators depend on the miners to secure the network, the miners actually also depend on the nodes to make sure that the rewards that they're mining are actually valuable. So that creates sort of a Mexican standoff, and so the node operators actually have a great deal of power, and that's why it's important to keep the network decentralized so that there is this balance of power between the node operators and the miners, so that one side doesn't get out of control compared to the other. In the case of the spam wars, on Valentine's Day 2023, just a couple of years ago, I created Inspection 81935. That consisted of a photo of my wife's and my wedding, and I had embedded in the metadata a poem that I wrote to her when we first started dating. So why did I do that? Besides the obvious reason, I bought into the narrative that competition for block space was important for scaling the network, and regardless of where that competition came from, that's the important point here. So the idea is that the more people that are competing for block space, the more that market drives up the fees for transactions. That will eventually replace the block subsidy, and then the higher the fees on the base layer, that drives innovation into the higher layers, so that the lower value transactions will happen in upper layers, and then those will aggregate down to the base layer in high value transactions. And I believe that the monetary transactions, because they were aggregates, would become more valuable over time, and that would outcompete the non-monetary uses of the base layer. So a couple of things that I got wrong there. One, there's no guarantee that the competition between non-monetary and monetary uses of the base layer will land in favor of the monetary uses. There's actually quite a bit of money that can be poured into scams, short duration scams, that could outcompete the monetary use. So you could end up with a blockchain that's used almost primarily for non-monetary uses, which kind of makes Bitcoin useless at that point as a monetary system. The other thing is about culture. If we invite more people who are into spam to operate in Bitcoin, that sort of changes our focus. Right now our focus has been on monetary systems, but if a lot of the money that's coming into Bitcoin is around spam and other uses, those uses are competing for the same development resources, the same priorities, and so on. So you begin to deprioritize to some extent things like decentralization and so on, in favor of whoever's pouring the most money into the network. The other thing too is you have to realize that that inscription that I made is going to be embedded in the blockchain forever. And that might seem romantic at first, but when you think about the fact that, 100 years from now, when my wife and I are long gone, a Venezuelan migrant in Colombia, for example, who's loading boxes by day, and at night he's secretly running a Bitcoin node that he and his roommates pitched in together to build, so that they can make remittances in secret back to their family, and stash away sats, whenever they can. Because of the UTXO bloat created by all of the spam, they had to spend more money to get more RAM, for example, on that device than they would have had to without that spam. And the spam doesn't matter to them at all. I mean, they're there for the monetary use, but they're having to store my wedding photo on their device. And that's the same for millions of other people that are running nodes all over the world that are trying to use Bitcoin as a financial system. And so that inscription is going to be there forever, embedded in the blockchain, embedded in the base of the global financial system. And an analogy would be something like a graffiti artist, for example, who spray paints on a building. The building landlord, in order to comply with city codes, he has to budget to restore and clean the building periodically when that happens. And that extra cost trickles down to the tenants in the form of higher rent. And so everyone's sort of having a worse scenario than they would have been. They're having to pay more. They're just trying to use the building for its original purpose, which is living. But they're having to pay more because somebody wanted to use it for another purpose, for, their artistic creativity, or to make some political point, or whatever it is they're doing with the graffiti. So I think that's a pretty good analogy of why spam on the blockchain is a bad thing. It makes it more expensive for people to use it for the purpose that it was originally intended, which is money. So enough on that. I've obviously learned since then that that it's important to be fighting against spam, and I've been promoting Bitcoin Knots for a while because it has, first of all, they're not going to remove the op return limit, and they have a number of other spam filters already built in by default. As soon as you start running it, those will start running. In my analogy, that would be the higher fence and the security cameras and so on, right? So in this video, I'm going to show you how to switch from Bitcoin Core to Bitcoin Knots so that you get all those extra spam fighting capabilities on all the major operating systems. I'm going to show you how to do it on Windows, Linux, Mac, as well as Start9, Umbrel, MyNode, and Raspiblitz. In addition to that, though, just running Bitcoin Knots, well, that does make sure you're not passing spam around the Bitcoin network, and you're only passing around financial transactions. It's also important to make sure your voice is heard, that you're actually being counted. For example, on bitnodes.io, that counts the different versions of nodes that are running. You want to make sure that your node is visible on the network so that you're included in the count of all the node operators who are running knots. And so I'll show you on each system. Some of these systems that'll happen just by default out of the box, but some of them that's not the case. And so the ones that do not install as public nodes, I'll show you how to make them public over the Tor network, and then to verify that you're publicly reachable using bitnodes.io. The other thing I've seen a criticism on quite a few videos that talk about switching to knots, that nobody explains the config options. They say, hey, install knots, but the criticism that's usually written is that doesn't tell people how to block the spam. So two things on that. One, the default settings on Bitcoin knots out of the box block pretty much all the spam. There's one setting called reject runes that I would recommend adding. I always do whenever I'm showing people how to set up Bitcoin knots. But out of the box, it's 100 times better than Bitcoin Core as far as its spam configurations. But I will include in the description, there's a really good video by, I believe, Satoshi21 that goes into each of the configuration options for Bitcoin knots. And so I definitely recommend looking at that if you want to understand what the config options are. But I just want to point out that simply running knots will help fight spam, because by default it's configured to fight spam. So that's just to sort of preempt those comments that I see on a lot of videos. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to begin with Linux, just because my main PC here is a Linux machine. So I've got Bitcoin Core running here, and so what you want to do is you want to make sure that Bitcoin Core is working and it's fully synced. We don't want to introduce any new variables into the equation. We want to make sure that Bitcoin Core is working before we do the switch, so that we can expect that Bitcoin knots will also work once we do the switch. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to shut down Bitcoin Core. Okay, and you want to make sure that it's fully shut down. That window that came up that says it's shutting down, you want to wait for that to close. Okay. Okay, next we're going to search for Bitcoin knots. GitHub. All right, we're going to go to the link on github.com. You can see that Bitcoin knots owns a number of different repositories. The repository that we're going to is called Bitcoin. So take note of the URL. It's github.com/bitcoinknots/Bitcoin. And then we're going to go to the releases. Okay, this is the latest release at the time of this video. And you can see that has the mark latest. So we're going to scroll down. And you can see there's a list of assets. There's a link here that says show all 33 assets. We're going to click on that. And this shows all the different versions of Bitcoin knots for different architectures. So we're going to download the one that says Linux, and that is for the architecture that we're running this on. So for example, if you're on a Raspberry Pi, you're probably going to either have the ARC64 or the ARM version. If you're on, say, Ubuntu or Linux Mint or something like that, you're probably going to be on the x86-64 Linux. The other thing too is you're going to make sure that whatever you download, that you check the signature on. I'm not going to go into that in this video just because it's going to make the video go for quite a bit longer. So to save time, I'm not going to check the signatures. I'll post a link to another video that goes into that. And I'd recommend using Sparrow for that. It makes it a lot easier. But for this video, I'm just going to download the file and run it without verifying it. So on this computer that I'm on is an x86-64 Linux. So I'm going to go ahead and download that one. And it can be a little bit daunting to read through these. You need to basically look past where it says Bitcoin knots. You're going to look at the architecture. So x86-64. You know, there's like the Win64, RISC-V64, PowerPC, and so on, right? So there's all these architectures. You need to find the architecture. and then you need to find the operating system. So in my case, it's x86-64 Linux, and so that's the one. And this is the they also have a debug version and a regular version. I just download the regular version. Okay. All right. So once you get your file downloaded, you're going to go open that folder where it landed, and you go ahead and extract it. And that's going to give you a file that has Bitcoin knots in it, a folder that has Bitcoin knots in it. And you move that somewhere wherever you want to keep your programs. I usually put it in a folder called bin, so I'm going to go ahead and move it over there. Okay, you can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to rename it Bitcoin knots. All right. And then we want to make sure the Bitcoin Core is not running. It should have been shut down from earlier. And then we're just going to go into Bitcoin knots, into the bin folder, and we're going to run Bitcoin Qt. And you can see that it uses the same config as Bitcoin Core. The Bitcoin initial blockchain download has already been completed, and so it doesn't have to do any indexing. It's already up to date with the blockchain, and Bitcoin knots is now running. Now at this point, if you want to create a shortcut for that, pin it to your taskbar, whatever, you can go ahead and do that. I won't go into that in this video. That's sort of basic Linux usage there, and it's going to depend on your distro anyway, how you do that. Okay, now that we have knots running, we're going to go ahead and give it a public Tor address so that other nodes on the network can connect to it and will be counted as a node that's running Bitcoin knots. For that, I've posted instructions on my forum at paulscode.com. There's a thread here called Make Knots Reachable over Tor on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And I've got sections for each of the operating systems. We're starting with Linux here, so I'm going to go ahead and click Details. And then we just need to run these commands. So we're going to start by installing and starting Tor, which we'll go to Terminal for that. Paste that in and run it. Okay, next we're going to expose Tor's control port and make the cookie readable. Then we're going to give your user access to Debian Tor, the group, so that it can access the cookie. Okay, and then at this point you need to log out of your current shell and back in. And you may need to reboot at this point, I've noticed. What you'll do is you just type groups, and if you see Debian Tor, you're good. But if you don't see Debian Tor, you'll probably need to reboot your computer, come back in, type groups, and you should see it at that point. That's one little quirk that I've noticed. Now in this case, I've got the group, so I'm good. Next thing I need to do is enable RPC server and Bitcoin knots. So we're going to go to Settings, Options, and check Enable RPC server. I've already checked it here, but this would be unchecked normally. You would just come in here and you would check it, and then hit OK. Next, we need to tell Bitcoin knots to use Tor. So from Bitcoin knots, we're going to open Settings, Options, Open Configuration File, and Continue. And then we're going to paste in these 3 lines here. Alright, so what these 3 configs are doing is they're telling us where the Tor proxy is located. We're going to tell them to listen for incoming connections, and we're listening over Onion, which is the Tor network. So we're going to hit save and close that. Okay, so now we need to shut down knots and restart it. for the changes to take effect. So we're going to hit OK and shut down knots. Okay, now that it's shut down, we're going to go ahead and start it back up. All right, and then we're going to run this command to get our Tor address. All right, and so there's our address right there. It's a big long random number of characters that ends in .onion. So we're going to go ahead and grab and copy that. So we don't need the double quotes, we just need the letters and the .onion. Okay, so we're going to copy that into the clipboard. And then we're going to go to bitnodes.io. And we're going to make sure that our node is reachable by going down over to join the network, and we're going to, where we have an IP address here, we're going to delete that and we're going to paste in that onion address, and then we're going to hit check node. And you can see that it's reachable and it's tagged as running Bitcoin knots. Okay, so we're good with Linux. I'll go ahead and shut that down. All right, next we're going to look at Windows. So let me bring up Windows. All right, so on Windows, you want to make sure that you've got Bitcoin Core installed and working and fully synced. Just so we're not introducing any new problems, we're going to go ahead and close Bitcoin Core and make sure it shut down completely. Okay. Then we're going to go get Bitcoin knots again. We go to Bitcoin knots GitHub. Okay, we're going to go to the github.com link. Okay, this is the Bitcoin knots page. We're going to go to the Bitcoin repository. Make note of the URL. It should be github.com/bitcoinknots/Bitcoin. We're going to go over to the releases. And then here on the latest release, we're going to scroll down to the assets. Show all 33 assets. And then on Windows, I'm going to use the unsigned setup application. That's probably the easiest way to get it on Windows. So win64-setup-unsigned.exe. Okay, Windows is going to complain that this is not a signed application. We're going to hit the three dots and click on Keep. It says make sure you trust it. We're going to click Show More and Keep Anyway. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and open the file. It says yes, we want to allow it to make changes. Click Next. Click where we want to install it. And we'll click Install. Okay, now we'll click Next. And Finish. Bitcoin Knots is now loading. And you can see it kept the blockchain data. It's fully synced and now it's running. Okay, now that we've installed Bitcoin Knots, we're going to go ahead and give it a public Tor address so that other nodes can connect to it and we can start being counted as a node that is running Bitcoin Knots. I have the instructions for that on my website at paulsco.com, so I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. it's this thread here, make knots reachable over Tor on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And this time we're looking at the instructions for Windows. Okay, the first thing we need to do is launch PowerShell as administrator. So we're going to go ahead and search for PowerShell. And then we're going to right click on it and run as administrator. Then we're going to click yes. Now the easiest way to do this is to start selecting from the first character here on the command down to the line where there's nothing, and then press Control C. So what that'll do is that'll copy the whole command plus the enter at the end of the line, so it'll automatically execute when I paste this into the terminal. So we'll come back over to the PowerShell terminal, and we can right click on it to paste from the clipboard. And you can see that'll automatically execute because I grabbed that extra line. Now the first time you run this, it's going to warn you that running scripts is potentially dangerous, and you're going to have to enter the letter Y and press enter. Since I've already done this once, it doesn't warn me again. So, but the first time you run it, you'll get that warning. Okay, next we're going to install something called Choco, which we're going to be using to install Tor. So once again, I did Control C, and then I'm pasting into the PowerShell terminal. Okay, at this point we need to shut down the PowerShell terminal and then relaunch it again as administrator. So I'm going to go ahead and search for it again. Run as administrator, click yes. And you know you're running as administrator, it should say administrator here in the title of the window. Okay, so now we're going to use Choco to install Tor. Control C, right click. Okay, Tor is installed. Now we're going to create the Tor service, which will run automatically whenever we start Windows. And this just makes it easier so we don't have to keep worrying about Tor. It'll just come up automatically. So I did Control C and then right click to paste. This takes about 30 seconds to run. Okay, and now we're done with the PowerShell, so we can go ahead and close it. Next, we're going to do some configuration in BitcoinNots itself. So we're going to go ahead and run BitcoinNots, should already be running. Then we're going to go to Settings and Options. We're going to enable the RPC server, and then we're going to click OK. And before we restart Knots, we're going to add some configs in as well for it to connect to Tor. So we're going to go to Settings, Options, and then we're going to click this button, Open Configuration File down here. I'm going to click Continue. It may ask you what you want to open the configuration file with. Just choose Notepad. In my case, it just opens Notepad automatically. So now we're going to copy the configuration that we're going to paste into there. Paste that in and then save. And what this does is it tells it the control port for Tor is over on 9051, the proxy is over on port 9050. It tells it needs to listen for incoming connections, and it needs to be listening on the Tor network. That's what these configs do. All right, we're going to go ahead and close this. And now that we've made changes to the knots config, we're going to have to shut down knots and restart it. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and then exit. And we'll wait for it to fully shut down. Okay, so now that knots is shut down, we're going to go ahead and launch it again. Okay, and now this time you can see that there is this, looks like a capital letter P. That tells you that you're connected to the Tor proxy. Alright, so our configuration to connect to Tor looks like it was successful. Now we're going to go ahead and go to the console so we can get our public Tor address. So we go to Window, we click on Console, and then here we're going to paste in this command right here, get network info, all one word. And then press enter. Okay, you can see here under local addresses, we've now got a .onion address. See this line here? Got a bunch of random characters and ends in .onion. So we're going to go ahead and copy that just to make sure that we can actually reach this node from the outside. So I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. I don't need the double quotes, I just need the letters all the way up through .onion. Alright, so we're just going to copy that to the clipboard, and then we're going to go over to BitNodes, bitnodes.io, and once that finishes loading here, we're going to scroll down to where it says join the network, and in this spot where it has an IP address, we're going to delete that, and we're going to paste in the .onion address that we have in the clipboard. Then we're going to click check node. And as you can see, it detects it and it knows that it is Bitcoin knots, as you can see here. Alright, so that's it for Windows. I'll go ahead and close this one down and we'll move on to Macintosh. Okay, now we're going to move on to Mac. Like we did before, we're going to make sure that Bitcoin Core is installed, running without any errors, and fully synced. That way we're not introducing any complications into the process. We're just going to make the switch over to Bitcoin knots. So I've got it fully installed here, as you can see. Now we're going to go ahead and grab the latest version of Bitcoin knots. So we'll go over to the browser, and we're going to search for Bitcoin knots GitHub. Okay, I'm going to go to this one that's on github.com. Alright, so this is the Bitcoin knots page, and we're going to click on the Bitcoin registry. Alright, and then we're going to go to releases, and we're going to scroll down to the bottom of the latest release. Alright, we'll go ahead and expand all the assets. Okay. And the one that we are looking for is called x8664 Apple Darwin .zip. It's this one right here. So we got Bitcoin 28.1.knots 2025-0305 dash x86_64 apple-darwin.zip. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and download this one. It says, do you want to download? We're going to go ahead and allow it. Okay, and so now we've got that downloaded. I'm going to close this. I'm going to go ahead and shut down Bitcoin Core. And on Mac, you can see that it's still running. It just it closed the window, but it didn't close Bitcoin Core. So I'm going to right-click on it. I'm going to make sure that it's fully shut down. We're going to click on Quit. And you can see that this window comes up. Let's make sure that this fully shuts down. This window will disappear. Okay, so now that Mac is fully shut down Bitcoin Core, we're going to open our Downloads folder. And we're going to drag Bitcoin Knots over to Applications. It says there's an old item named Bitcoin Core that already exists. Do you want to replace it? We're going to say yes, we want to replace it. All right. I'm going to go ahead and unpin Bitcoin Core from the launcher. And I'm going to empty my trash just to clean up a little bit. And so now I'm going to go over to my launch pad, and there's Bitcoin Knots. I'll go ahead and run it. It says it was downloaded from internet. Are you sure you want to open it? I'm going to say yes, I want to open it. And you can see it's loaded and fully synced. So we did not have to redo the initial blockchain download, just like on the other operating systems. Okay, so now that we've got Bitcoin Knots running on Mac, next we're going to give it a public Tor address so that the other nodes can connect to it, and we can start counting this node as one that's running Bitcoin Knots. For that, I have the instructions again on my website at paulscode.com, so I'm going to go ahead and bring those up. And the one we want is make knots reachable over Tor on Windows, Mac, and Linux. This time we're looking at the details for Mac. Okay. Now for this to work, you will need to install Homebrew. I'm not going to go through that in this video for the sake of time, but I've got a link to the Homebrew page which shows how to install it. So I'm going to assume that you have Homebrew already installed, and then I will open up Terminal, and we're going to run a few commands here. So first we're going to install Tor via Homebrew. Okay, so now we've installed Tor. We're going to permit the control port access. Okay, and that's all we need to do in the terminal here, so go ahead and close that. Okay, so next we're going to set some configurations in Bitcoin Knots. So we go up to the Bitcoin Knots menu and click on Preferences. And then we're going to click on Enable RPC Server, and then OK. The path here is wrong. I'll update this. It says Settings Options, but it's actually Bitcoin Knots Preferences is the menu. I put the menu for a Linux on here, but I'll update this. Okay, so now that we've enabled RPC Server, next we're going to add some items into the bitcoin.conf file. So the way we do that is we go to Bitcoin Knots, Preferences, and then we're going to click on Open Configuration File, and then click on Continue. This opens up a notepad here where we're going to paste in these configuration options. And we're going to save and exit. Okay, now we're going to make the changes apply, we need to shut down Knots and restart it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Click OK. Going to shut down Knots. Make sure it's fully shut down. Okay, and now we're going to launch it again. Okay, now you can see that there's this icon, looks like the capital letter P. That means we're connected to the Tor proxy. Alright, so what we want to do is we want to get our public Tor address. So for that we're going to go to Window and click on Console. And then we're going to grab this command here, get network info, all one word. And we're going to paste it into the console and press enter. Oops, didn't copy it. I'll just type it in, get network info, enter. Alright, and you can see there is our public Tor address right here. So we're going to go ahead and grab that. It's bunch of random characters with a .onion. So we're going to capture just the address, not the double quotes on each side of it. We're just going to capture just the random characters all the way through .onion. We're going to copy that, and then we're going to hop over to the browser, and we're going to go to bitnode.io. Bitnodes, plural, bitnodes.io. And once that loads, we're going to scroll down. And here where we have this IP address, we're going to delete that out. And we're going to paste in that onion address that we copied and click on Check Node. And we can see that our node is now reachable, and it's reporting that it is Bitcoin Knots. So now peers on the network can connect to our node running on Mac. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and shut down now that we're done with demonstrating how to do this on Mac. Okay, so now that we've finished demonstrating how to hook up Knots on Linux, Windows, and Mac, next I'm going to show you how it's done on Start9. So for this I'm going to go to my Start9 test server. It's called duskybias.local. Now there's instructions for this on over here on the Start9 community. StuPleb has posted the instructions here, so we can follow along with this. So basically you're going to go over to your server, and you're going to shut down everything that depends on Bitcoin Core. Now I guess I should say first of all, before you get started, make sure the Bitcoin Core is installed and fully synced and there's no issues with it, just like before. All right, so we're going to go ahead and shut down all the things that are depending on Bitcoin Core. Okay, then we're going to shut down Bitcoin Core itself. Okay. Once everything is shut down, we're going to go to the StartOS System tab and click on the Manage heading 5 times to enable developer mode. So we're going to go to System, and we're going to click on this Manage heading 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see Dev Tools Unlocked showed up down there. Okay. Then we're going to the Community Registry, and we're going to look up knots, and we're going to click on Reinstall. So we'll go to the Marketplace. We need to change to the Community Registry if we're not on it already. And then we're going to search for knots. Okay, we're going to click on that, and we're going to click the Reinstall button. If this Reinstall button is not visible, then go back, make sure you've enabled the developer mode by clicking on that Manage heading 5 times. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and click Reinstall. Now it says it's going to claim that the reinstallation failed, but don't worry, it actually succeeded. What we need to do to make it work is open the knots config and click on save. Okay, so this is just telling us not to worry that it's going to say that it failed. You can see here we got a notification, Bitcoin knots install failed, but we don't need to worry about that. We'll just go ahead and delete that. We're going to go to the services, we're going to click on Bitcoin knots, and we're going to click on configure. Now in here you can make some changes if you want to. I think the defaults on Bitcoin knots are pretty reasonable. One that I do tend to change is I like to turn on reject tokens. You don't necessarily have to, but this reduces a little bit more of the spam by having this enabled as well. So I usually enable that one. And then you just click on save. Okay, and then now we can go ahead and start it. Okay, you can see they started and it's already fully synced, so we did not have to re-download the blockchain data. Now if you want to refresh the icon, so it shows right now it's showing the original Bitcoin Core icon. If you want to see the Bitcoin knots icon, the way you can do that is you can go to your browser settings, you want to go to More Tools, and then click on Developer Tools. And this allows you to right click on the refresh button and then click on Empty Cache and Hard Reload. And then at this point you can close the Developer Tools down at the bottom here, and you can see now you've got your Bitcoin knots icon. That's more of a aesthetic thing. You don't necessarily have to do that, but if you want to see the nice Bitcoin knots icon, you can do that. And if you ever switch back to Bitcoin Core, the process is exactly the same as I just showed, except you'll be putting Bitcoin Core on there, and then if you want to see that original icon, same kind of a deal. You can enable developer mode, right click on refresh, and then reload the cache. Okay, so now we can go ahead and start up our other services that depended on Bitcoin Core originally. Now they're going to connect to Bitcoin knots. Okay, everything's running well. And then we can go to the System tab again and turn off developer mode. This is not strictly required, but it will get your UI looking back the way you're expecting it to look. So we're going to click on this 5 times, Manage heading. You can see Dev Tools are now hidden. Okay, so now we're going to make sure that our node is publicly available. We're going to go ahead and click on Bitcoin knots. I'm going to click on Interfaces. And what we want is the peer interface. Make sure you don't copy from like the RPC or the 0MQ interface. We want to copy from the peer interface only, and it's called the Tor address. So we're going to go ahead and copy the Tor address. Then we're going to hop over to bitnodes.io. Okay, then we're going to scroll down and delete the value that's in there, and we're going to paste in the value that we copied. Now before you check this, it has an extra little bit at the beginning here. See this http:// we need to get rid of that part. We want just the letters, then the ending of .onion. And we're going to click check node. And you can see it's reachable and it's reporting that it is Bitcoin nuts. Okay, so that's how you do Start9. Next, we're going to look at Umbrel. For this, I've got instructions over here. I'll post in the description. So this is a guide on how to migrate from core to knots on Umbrel. So the first thing we need to do is install Bitcoin knots if it's not already done. So we're going to go ahead and install it. Search for knots and click install. Okay, and we're going to make sure it's stopped, which it should be, but let's go ahead and make sure. Right click, stop. Okay, it was not stopped actually. Okay, do the same with Bitcoin Core. So we're going to right click and then click stop. Okay, now we need to open the terminal. So we're going to go to settings, click on the open button on the advanced settings section. Advanced settings. And then we click on terminal open. Okay, it says we need to open the Umbrel OS terminal. So that's, we're going to click on Umbrel OS. Okay, and it says paste this command and press enter to move the blockchain data from Bitcoin Core to Bitcoin knots. So we're going to go ahead and copy this full command here. And we're going to paste that in. So now let me paste it. Let's see here, I'm going to do Control V. Okay, I may need to type it in. Let's see. Paste this command, press enter to move the block. Yeah, it's just not letting me paste it for some reason. So I'm going to go ahead and have to type it, looks like, which is a little bit annoying, but see if I can get both of these open at the same time here. Okay, so cd umbrel --app data This is basically doing a bunch of series of commands, so I'll sort of explain what these are doing. So it says we want to go into the Umbrel app data folder, and we want to remove the Bitcoin knots data folder, and we want to move the Bitcoin data folder to the Bitcoin knots data folder. And so this Bitcoin knots /, that means we're going to take this folder here, which is the source, and we're going to move it underneath Bitcoin knots. So this is going to end up with Bitcoin knots /data, just like what we removed over here initially. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and scroll over, see what we got to do next. Okay, so it says, and we're going to remove so it says we're going to remove, so we've moved the Bitcoin data folder into Bitcoin knots data folder. And now what we're doing is we're removing the Bitcoin config JSON file that got moved over to Bitcoin knots data. Presumably this configuration file we want to recreate for Bitcoin knots would be my guess as to why they're doing that. Essentially what this has done is it's taken the entire blockchain data from Bitcoin Core, moved it over to Bitcoin knots, and then deleted a particular config file. Press enter. All right. It says now you can close the terminal and get back to the main menu. Okay, so let's just reopen Umbrel. Now we can start Bitcoin knots and see if the chain is synced. Okay, so let's go ahead and right click start. Let's go ahead and run it and see what we got. Okay, and it's fully synced. All right, so that's what we wanted. We didn't want to have to re-download the blockchain again. Okay. Now it says swap all apps that require Bitcoin to use Bitcoin knots. So we need to manage our different applications. We got Core Lite. Let's start with the Electrum REST server first. Settings. I'm going to select Bitcoin knots. Save changes. We're going to do Core Lightning, settings, we're going to choose Bitcoin knots, save changes. And then let's do mempool, settings, Bitcoin knots, save changes. Okay, and then we'll just make sure everything's loading properly. Let's try mempool. Okay, everything looks like it loaded. Next, let's go over to Core Lightning, make sure it's loading properly. Yep, the balance is still there. And Electrum REST server, it's fully synchronized. All right, cool. So next, let's go to, actually let me go ahead and finish that. Instructions. Okay, so it says, swap all the apps that require Bitcoin to Bitcoin Knots, and now you can uninstall Bitcoin Core. Okay, so let's go ahead and uninstall Bitcoin Core. And they've got a video for how to do it here as well if you want to watch that. Okay, so now we got Bitcoin Knots running on Umbrel. We're going to go ahead and grab its public Tor address so we can make sure that it is reachable and we're being counted as a node that's running Knots. So for that, we're going to go ahead and open up Bitcoin Knots. Then we're going to click on Connect. And we want to select peer-to-peer Tor. So it's by default it has RPC Tor, but we want the peer-to-peer Tor. This is the one that the public network can connect to. And then we're going to go ahead and select this Bitcoin Knots peer-to-peer address and copy it into the clipboard. And then we're going to go over to bitnodes.io and we'll scroll down and remove the IP address from here, put in our .onion address, and click Check Node. Okay, it says we are unreachable. Oh, it looks like we're using a different peer-to-peer port here. So this is interesting. This is using 9333 instead of 8333. So let's go ahead and change that. Yep, and it's reachable, and it's reporting that it is running Bitcoin Knots. Okay, so that was Umbrel. Okay, now that we've finished with Umbrel, let's move on to MyNode. On your MyNode webpage, you're going to first make sure that Tor is enabled. So you're going to scroll down and click on Settings. And then a little way down the page, there is this networking section. And you need to make sure that Tor is enabled next to Bitcoin. If it's not, go ahead and enable it, and that'll reboot your MyNode. So you'll just wait for it to reboot and then come back here and make sure that it's showing up as enabled. Next, we need to grab our public Tor address. So on the home page, click on Manage under Bitcoin Core. And we're going to copy this onion address, basically everything up through the word onion here. We don't need the port. We just need all the letters all the way up through onion. And we're going to copy that. And I'm going to go ahead and save that for later. And the reason is once I install Bitcoin Knots on here, this onion address stops showing up. If anybody knows how to re-enable that, there's probably a deprecated API or something. MyNode uses core version 27.1 by default, and so some of the APIs are deprecated on there. Bitcoin Knots is built on 28.1, and so my guess is there's probably some API that they're using for this that is the syntax has changed, so that once you install Knots, you won't see this address anymore. So you need to copy that and save it somewhere so you know your node's address. Okay, so once you've copied that onion address, next we're going to go back to the home page and we're going to scroll down to Settings. And then we're going to scroll down on this page a little bit. All the way down under Bitcoin, there is a custom Bitcoin version section. All right, and here we're going to select Bitcoin Knots version 28.1. So we're going to select that and click Install. Now there's one problem once we've switched to Bitcoin Knots 28.1, which is that MyNode by default was running core version 27.1. And there are a couple of deprecated APIs. One of them, like I mentioned, was that we couldn't get that onion address, but there's another one that actually prevents the Lightning node from starting. And I've got a fix for that one, so I'll show you how that works. Okay, so once your node has started back up, you'll see that it's not going to connect to the Lightning node. And the reason is that we need to update that configuration that I mentioned. So we're going to go ahead and click on Manage under Bitcoin. We're going to click on View Edit the configuration. And then we're going to scroll through here. You can see that there is a place that has deprecated RPCs right here. So enable deprecated RPCs if any. We're going to copy this line right here. It says deprecated RPC equals crate BDB. We're just going to copy that and then paste another line underneath it. Basically the same thing, right? So we got deprecated RPC equals crate BDB, and then another line that says deprecated RPC equals crate BDB. Now we're going to delete crate BDB and we're going to type the word warnings. Okay, so there's a RPC called warnings that has changed. The way it used to be in 27.1 is it would just return a string with the warnings in it. And they changed that in 28.1 where it's an array of strings. So you can have more than one warning. Each one gets their own string and they're all wrapped into an array. So MyNode doesn't know how to deal with that type of response, so we need to tell it to use the deprecated RPC for warnings. That's what this does. So we're going to go ahead and hit save. And this is going to restart the MyNode once again. Okay, so now that's loaded, we're just going to make sure that everything starts up properly. Looks like we've got Bitcoin knots running, we've got Lightning running, RTL just came up. Okay. Alright, so now that everything's showing green, we're going to go make sure that we can actually reach our node. Go to bitnodes.io and we're going to grab that onion address that we saved earlier. And we're going to scroll down and take out that IP address, paste in our onion address, and click on check node. And we see that our node is now reachable, and it is reporting that it is running Bitcoin knots. Okay, we can make sure our services are working properly. Yep, looks good here. Let's hit ride the Lightning. Yeah, balance is still there. Everything looks good. Okay, now that we've finished with MyNode, let's move on to Raspiblitz. For Raspiblitz, first we need to actually connect in through SSH. And the reason is that there isn't a UI in Raspiblitz for updating the version of Bitcoin that you're running. So we'll just SSH as admin into the Raspiblitz. This is something you should be familiar with if you use Raspiblitz. It's a little more DIY than some of the other node varieties. So it's admin at whatever domain you've given your Raspiblitz. I think by default it's Raspberry Pi. Mine's called Paul's Raspiblitz. .local. Okay, now you'll be presented with this blue screen. We just press Control-C to drop into the terminal. And you can type the word clear to make things a little easier to read. Okay. Now I've got instructions for how to do this over on my website, which we're going to hop over to. Raspiblitz knots. Okay, so on my website, it's the thread called Switching to Knots on Raspiblitz. Okay, so we've already done this first step. We've SSH'd into Raspiblitz as admin. Okay, a couple of notes before I get started on these instructions. The current version of Raspiblitz is 1.11.4, and that version was released before the devs of Raspiblitz had written the script to install Bitcoin knots. The script is on the GitHub repository, and we're going to download and run it. But if you're on a version after 1.11.4, like you're watching this video and a new version has come out, you won't need to download the script because it's already going to be on the Raspiblitz. The other thing to note is if you're on a version of Raspiblitz before 1.11.4, you're going to need to upgrade to 1.11.4 first. And the reason is the version of Bitcoin Core that runs on the Raspiblitz by default is version 26. And later versions of Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Knots, like 28.1, which we're going to be installing, they require a newer version of Debian. And that newer version of Debian is only on 1.11.4. So you need to make sure you upgrade to 1.11.4 if you're on an earlier version before running these series of commands. And if you're on a version after 1.11.4, you won't need to download and install the Bitcoin Knots installation script. You can just run it. All right, so let me go ahead and start running these commands and show you how they work. So we've already SSH'd into the Raspiblitz. So we're going to go ahead and run this set of commands here. This will download and install the Bitcoin Knots installation script. And like I mentioned, if you're on a newer version than 1.11.4, you will not need to run this set of commands here. Okay, it's downloaded and installed that script. Okay. And this is where you would pick up if you're on a newer version than 1.11.4. You'd pick up right here with this set of commands here. So first we're going to stop Lightning. If you're running Core Lightning, you're going to do this command here, sudo systemctl stop lightning d. If you're running LND, you're going to do systemctl stop LND. Okay, I'm doing Core Lightning, so I'm going to copy this one. Okay, then we're going to stop Bitcoin D, and after it's fully shut down, then we're going to run that script to replace it with Bitcoin Knots. So we're going to take these commands here. And this will take about 30-40 seconds to finish. Okay, so it's done installing Bitcoin Knots. We're going to go ahead and run this command here to make sure that it reports that it is running Bitcoin Knots. And you can see it says that it's running Bitcoin Knots version 28.1.knots 2025-0305. Right, so that's the latest version of Knots. Okay, so at this point there is a potential problem you may run into, which is that Bitcoin Core version 26 actually allowed the blockchain to have corrupt data in it. It would not stop running and tell you to reindex. It would just treat that as a warning. But starting in version 27, I believe, corrupt blockchain data actually stopped Bitcoin Core from running, and Bitcoin Knots as well. And they require you to reindex if there is corrupt data. So at this point you may have corrupt data that you didn't realize you had, because Bitcoin Core 26 would just go ahead and run with the corrupt data. And then suddenly Knots is going to tell you, hey, you need to reindex because you got corrupt data. So if that happens, there's no way around that. You'll have to reindex the blockchain. That'll take a day or so to do the reindex. It is kind of a good deal though, because if you don't fix the corrupt data, at some point that's going to cause a problem, so it's better to fix it once the problem is identified rather than waiting for it to block something else from working. So if you have corrupt data, you're going to have to go ahead and reindex. Now the way we can check if we have corrupt data is there's a couple of commands I got in the instructions here. Okay, so it says check if a reindex is needed. We're going to run this command. It says if the above command hangs forever, then you'll need to reindex. It did not hang forever. It actually printed out the block height that it was at and what percentage it was with the blockchain download. this rounds up to 100%. So basically it's saying it's fully synced and it did not have any issues, right? But if you type that command and it just sits there and it never returns anything, then that means you're going to have to reindex. So I've got commands in here. You can skip over these if you don't need to reindex, like I don't need to reindex in this case. But if you do, then this command here will confirm that blockchain is actually the problem that you're running into. Almost certainly it is if you're hanging on that previous command. And then this is the command you'll run to stop the Bitcoin daemon and then reindex the blockchain. I don't need to do that in this case, but these are the commands for that. And then while that's running, again, it's going to take a day or so to get through and reindex. You can run this command to follow the logs, and this will just show which block it's on. You'll get an idea of how long you got to wait till it's going to be done. All right. So once that's fully done, then you can press Control-C. It mentions right here, press Control-C whenever it's fully finished with the reindexing. And now we can run this command here. So this is where we're actually going to pick up, since we didn't need to do a reindex. We're going to pick up from right here. We can run this command to make sure that the initial blockchain download is actually finished. So we'll paste that in. And what we expect to see is two numbers that are identical. This is the current block height and the word false. Okay, so it says that right here. You should see two identical numbers and the word false. If these numbers are different, or you see the word true down here instead of false, that means the initial blockchain download is still in progress. In this case, the initial blockchain download is done, so we can continue on. Now that we have fully reindexed, we're caught up and everything, we need to actually stop Bitcoin. And once it's fully stopped, we're going to wait for 30 seconds to make sure it fully stops. Then we're going to reboot the Raspiblitz. So we'll go ahead and copy this and run that. Okay, now that our Raspiblitz is rebooted, we're going to hop into the UI and make sure everything's working. Okay, everything booted up. Let's check some of the apps. Okay, so one thing you'll notice in the instructions is that it's possible that an Electrum Rust server index also got corrupted. And the way you'll notice that is in Raspiblitz, the mempool future blocks and fee estimates will never stop loading. Now it's normal if your Raspiblitz has been off for a while that Electrum will need to catch up on the indexing. But if it stays here for a really long time, it's just never loading, then you potentially have a corrupt index on Electrum, and you'll have to rebuild that. Basically, what that would look like is you'd see a bunch of these brownish blocks with nothing. There would be no text on them. And then all the fee estimates would all be blank, and there'd be none of this animation and stuff going on down here. So it sort of look like this side of the equation will be sort of in like a loading looking state. And it mentions that over here. So it manifests in Raspiblitz as mempool future blocks and fee estimates never loading. Okay, and so if that happens, you'll come here, you'll SSH into your Raspiblitz again as admin. Okay, and then you'll press Control-C to hop down to the terminal. You can type clear. All right, so once you're in your terminal, then you would just run these commands here. To rebuild the index for Electrum. Electrum takes a couple hours at least, a few hours I would say, to rebuild its index. So once you reboot and come back in, you'll still see this loading, and you'll just have to wait for a few hours for it to finish re-indexing. Once it's fully indexed, you'll see everything will start to animate correctly on this side of mempool. And I've got the commands here for if you need to revert back to core 26 if something breaks. But if you run into any problems with Raspiblitz, it'd be very helpful if you hop onto my forum at paulscode.com. Just sign up for an account if you don't have one, and then post what your issue was, because I really would like to work out whatever problems there might be getting knots to work on Raspiblitz. It seems to be working just on my initial test, but I haven't dug into it very deeply. I know there's a lot of other applications you can run on the Raspiblitz that I've not tested. That same goes for the MyNode as well, right? I have not tested that very deeply either. So if you run into any problems on any of these updates, or the commands aren't working like they're supposed to, or you need to revert and the reversion's not working, whatever problem you might be running into, just hop on the forum and we can have a chat about it. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our Raspiblitz's public Tor address, and we're going to check it in bitnodes.io to make sure that is publicly reachable and reporting that we are running Bitcoin knots. For that, the last command here in the instructions on my website, we're going to grab that. We're going to paste that into the terminal. We're SSH'd into our Raspiblitz as admin, like we showed earlier. Just going to paste that command in here, and then that's going to print out a onion address, which we need to copy, and then we're going to hop over to bitnodes.io, and we'll scroll down, take out this IP address here. We're going to paste in our .onion address and click on check node. And you can see that it's reachable, and it's reporting that it's running Bitcoin knots. Okay, that's everything I had planned for this video. I do want to do a part 2, so if you have some other Node operating systems that you'd like me to cover in part 2, just hop on my forum at paulscode.com and mention what they are. Or if you have different variations, like maybe you installed the application different, or you put your data directory in a different folder and you're running into problems with my instructions. Or maybe if I posted something incorrectly, it's not working, just hop over on the forum and we can talk about it. I'm probably also going to do, if there's interest, maybe a series of video where I do one video on each of the operating systems and I go into a little more in-depth. For example, I skipped over the checking the signatures, for example. Maybe go into a little more in depth of sort of from setup to finish, getting Bitcoin knots running, and maybe connect to Sparrow. We could even throw in Datum Gateway on there, and get a Bitcoin miner ASIC connected up. So if you have any ideas about that, just hop over to my forum and we'll have a chat. My forum's at paulscode.com. Just sign up for an account if you don't have one already. I'll approve you, and then you can get on there and post whatever it is you want to talk about. Or we can chat in the comments section as well. So I'll see you in the next video.